This conference will now be recorded.
Hey, first I want to just say thank you to everyone who's logged in. I know there are several people who are logged in that were invited by Jim Bertel, and I really appreciate that, who normally attend Jim sessions, and I appreciate you guys joining. Today we're going to be talking about China, and when we use the word China, just to set the stage for this, we're really talking about the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. The people of China, they're just the subjects of the Chinese Communist Party. And over the last probably several months in particular, not to mention over the last year or so, China has really come into the news and been prominent in the news like I don't think I've ever seen previously. And my introduction into China's aspirations to do what they're doing really began to sort of surface back in the 90s, probably when I saw China purchasing just a lot of U.S. debt. And I thought that is not a good thing. And you got a communist government purchasing all this debt. And of course, we were operating under the illusion at the time, perpetrated by many who held power positions in the United States, that, oh, China is moving and gravitating more toward a capitalistic model and they're becoming more open. Well, not so fast. I also saw China's involvement in places like the Philippines and even the U.S. real estate market. At that time, I was working with a accounting firm that was doing a lot of work in real estate, and I began to see China getting involved more and more in the purchase and are also the development of real estate. As a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I saw a segment on the news where a Chinese general had purchased a bunch of real estate in Southwest Texas, not too far from one of our major bases, and has a huge airstrip on this about 200 square mile plot of land. Um, Also, my familiarity with China's aspirations really began to, I guess, become more educated as I began to listen to interviews and read some information from certain authors and writers and other officials through podcasts, interviews, such as men such as Bill Gertz. Caleb will probably mention him briefly. Michael Pillsbury, who wrote the 100-Year Marathon. Peter Schweitzer, who wrote Clinton Cash. He's been interviewed quite frequently, most recently this morning on Maria Bartiromo, her show called Sunday Morning Futures. She had a brief segment interviewing Peter Schweitzer, and he had incredible things to say. And Maria Bartiromo committed to her audience right then and there that she would pursue every effort possible to keep the Chinese Communist Party from taking over the United States in terms of its influence. And then other shows like Laura Ingraham, she's brought out a lot of good stuff, and many others. The big question that we're going to be looking at today is, does the rise of China and or the CCP really have anything to do with the setting of the stage from a biblical eschatological perspective? And we've been dealing with biblical eschatology for years in my ministry and teaching sessions that I've taught and different series that I've taught. And the question on the table with regard to China, given what we see, is and the prominence that we see China, I guess, playing in the news cycle and in the involvement in our lives now, do they have anything to do with the setting of the stage? So that's the big question, and we'll address that question as we get into today's session. But I want to turn it over to Caleb right now, and Caleb, thank you so much for doing this, and I want to turn it over to him, and I will share the PowerPoint, Caleb, that you have sent me, and let me pull that up so people can see it. And Caleb, will you confirm that it's visible to you,
Uh,
especially?
yeah, I can see it fine, Steve.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to let you kick this off and then we'll get into our questions. Okay.
Okay, great. So yeah, these are the three books that I read and in preparation for the study, and a lot of the thoughts and comments which I'll share today are just based on previous experiences and some more research that I've done. Including a lot of discussions with Steve and other people that are familiar with what China is doing throughout the world.
Okay. Caleb, so maybe the way we kick this off is talking about kind of big picture, how does China's government and economy sort of operate, and is China really a communist Marxist type country?
Yeah. Well, China can now be described as more authoritarian capitalist than communist. Back in 1978, China was open to private enterprise and investment, including some foreign investment, and they shifted away from an agricultural model and more towards manufacturing, which really led to a lot of explosive growth over the past 40 or so years. Placing them really second in GDP only to the United States. Some people say that China makes another billionaire every 2 days. Back in 78, their GDP was $150 billion, and in 2019 it was 14 trillion. That's 90 times as much as it was back in 1978, and second only to the United States. But regardless of the perceived free market environment, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, which is what we'll refer to them throughout this presentation, is heavily involved in all aspects of business throughout China. Money talks, and with this explosive economic growth, CCP is using their economic clout to silence critical voices both in China and abroad, and also to undermine efforts to protect human rights. Their so-called free market economy is not ushered in more democracy or freedom as many people in the West thought it would. In every major company throughout China, there's a CCP board member. They claim that they have a free market economy, but the CCP controls all aspects of the lives of the citizens, and it really depends on the repression of the citizens to remain in power. There's no freedom of speech, there's no freedom of press, and the CCP controls the content of news to its citizens. So there's a common theme throughout the entire discussion today, and that is China is a master at deceptive practices, and they've been honing these skills for centuries. Just think about the deception that was propagated, throughout the whole, coronavirus pandemic. Even today, military and business leaders from many countries study Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War. And for China, it's all about the ends or results, and the means of these ends are irrelevant. Lie, or lie, cheat, or steal. China's going to do whatever is necessary to achieve their objectives.
Hmm. And, I heard you say something, Caleb. I want to follow up on that a little bit. I think probably some of the material you read may have indicated that China has a capitalistic orientation to some extent. I don't. I think what they do is it's whatever market exchange and businesses they allow. It's truly what they allow, right? It's truly a controlled economy. So anytime you move into that type of controlled environment, even if it's an allowance for some business to occur, it's under the thumb and under the purview of the CCP. Would that be a correct assessment of what from what you've read?
Absolutely, and the CCP is using their countries to enrich China and the CCP. So they're allowing these companies to operate because they recognize that a what they call a free market economy is the only way they're going to increase their wealth through the country. But they have complete control over these companies. As I said, there's a CCP board member on every company in China.
Hmm. So I would categorize any association of the word capitalism with China, just for everybody's benefit. If there is any association of the word capitalism with China, it should be caveated with a government controlled capitalism or and crony capitalism, because that's really what it is. It's not true free market capitalism as we would desire here in the United States and have desired in the past, and maybe what we had in the past. Even here in the United States, we have moved away from free market capitalism to a more cronyism type of functioning, wherever we have the federal government investing in businesses or supporting or subsidizing businesses. That's effectively crony capitalism. So we ourselves have become compromised, and to the young people coming through our academic pipeline, What they don't see is they don't see that distinction between free market capitalism, which was more consistent with the aspirational values of our founding fathers, versus what we've gravitated to through the rise of the administrative state, that is more and more drifting in the direction of a, a controlled type capitalistic environment by the government, such as China now has. So I just wanted to call out that distinction, and thanks for pointing it out, Caleb. So now, what threat, with all of that, what threat does China really pose to Christians to practice their faith? Because that's where we really want to go, is kind of looking at that too.
Yeah. So, you think about China's population of, 1.4 billion people, there are
Mm,
actually a lot of Christians in China. It's estimated that by 2030, China will have more Christians than the United States or any other country in the world. It's the fastest growing Christian nation in the world. So recognizing this, the CCP has implemented measures to control the influence of Christianity because they recognize that this could be, a threat to their citizens' allegiance to the state. Publicly, China states, a lot of times, in most recently, in a recent white paper, which is kind of it's like the government's perspective on a current issue, is that it adopts policies on freedom of religious belief that are based on national and religious conditions to protect their citizens' right to freedom and religious belief. But again, you have to remember that China is this master of deception, and although Christianity is not officially banned in China, it is controlled, and the citizens are not allowed to proselytize or attempt to convert non-believers or members of other faiths. So obviously Christian missionaries are not welcome in China. And while churches of any faith are not necessarily illegal, the government can restrict a message that is preached or taught in these churches, and it can shut down churches using false or trivial accusations. And there's really no legal recourse for the church. Christians
mm,
are sometimes arrested for preaching or listening to messages not sanctioned by the CCP. Christians in general open themselves up to increased monitoring and scrutiny by the CCP. I'll talk later about surveillance methods and social credit scores that the CCP is using. The CCP has randomly removed, crosses, or even demolished churches over trumped up charges such as building code violations or other legal reasons. And many times this activity occurs around Christmas time. The CCP has actually retranslated the Bible to align with CCP objectives and encourage their churches to teach this message instead of the actual Bible. Downloading unauthorized versions of the Bible is illegal, and the state-controlled internet searches in China do not include the full Bible. Only portions authorized by the CCP. In some regions, the children are highly discouraged or forbidden to attend church services, and for all these reasons that we talk about, most Christians meet in very small settings in their apartments or other underground venues. So in general, although the CCP does not publicly denounce Christianity, they want their people to pledge their allegiance towards a state,
mm.
vice a higher power. It's not too dissimilar to the threat that Jesus posed to the power of the Jewish state in the first century.
Yeah, so they have the underground church, and then they have the state-sanctioned churches in China. I know in more recent times, the last few years, as you mentioned, and I don't want to jump ahead of you, Caleb, but they have been monitoring and putting up cameras in the churches to monitor the churches, and that affects the social credit score. But I don't want to jump ahead of there, but I know you're going to touch on that a little bit later, I think. So let's move and talk, kind of moving out, kind of building out from the inside out, if you will, the China's influence outside of the mainland China. What's their, what's happening in Hong Kong now, and does Hong Kong give us a picture of what China might do with any country that they gain control over?
Okay, yeah, sure. You want to go to the next slide, Steve? I can kind of talk to this slide.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Let me move that for you. There we go.
Okay, so just kind of orient you to this area here is mainland China at the top, and of course you can see where Hong Kong is, and Taiwan in the South China Sea. And the circle there is kind of some contested areas, in the South China Sea, and that big long arrow coming through is where almost every ship in the world traveling from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean has to travel through. So anyway, I'll kind of talk through this. Kind of limit
Sorry
our
about that,
you know
Caleb.
to
I accidentally clicked on it and I didn't mean to move it for you, but
okay. So Hong Kong is this tiny island there on the southern border of China, and it contains about 7.5 million people, close to the population of New York City or London. And you may recall that it was a British colony and until 1997, and then the UK gave Hong Kong back to China under the agreement of what's called one country, two systems. Okay, and this was to last for 50 years, 1997 to 2047. And remarkably, this agreement expires right before the 100-year anniversary of the People's Republic of China, which was founded in 1949. So currently, Hong Kong is what's called a semi-autonomous region. They've got the right to vote, freedom of speech, freedom of press and assembly, unlike China, whose authoritarian government has the right to arrest, punish, and silence people who speak out against the CCP. So you can imagine that this drives China absolutely crazy, and they're not waiting until 2047 for this deal to expire. They're starting to arrest pro-democracy activists. There's booksellers that have gone missing. China has a huge influence over Hong Kong elections and the Hong Kong legislature makeup. There's extradition bills that have been passed to allow Hong Kong citizens to be imprisoned in China. And they're trying to pass just national security laws that benefit China. So that's Hong Kong. And so now you look at Taiwan, which is to the east of it. While China, they've got a clear path to get Hong Kong back. And it's will occur in 2047 if something that doesn't happen, or could be, before then if China takes it by force. But it doesn't have a clear path for Taiwan, and this is a major thorn in their side. They could attempt to reunify the 23 million people of this multi-party democratic state, which it lost in 1949. But one key takeaway to remember about China is their time horizon, right? They are all about the long game, right? They're not interested in short-term games, unlike, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Xi Jinping doesn't have to worry about the upcoming election, right? So, the time, probably isn't right for China to invade Taiwan and reunify it. This, might damage their perception in the world, which is critical to all the initiatives that we'll talk about here in a few minutes. And while China is building their military capabilities at an alarming pace, they are laser focused on their worldwide economic power and influence. But one area where they are, kind of building up a lot of militaries in the South China Sea region there, where the Oval is. This area is rich in oil reserves, fish, and it's in the middle of a major sea lines of communication. All the traffic, coming from the Indian Ocean has to go through that Strait of Malacca there. And I've been through there probably more times than I can remember. But I can tell you, it is the busiest strait in the entire world. Just imagine just massive cargo ships just lined up back to back 24 hours a day traveling through that strait, and it all has to flow through that area and the South China Sea, where China is building up all these military bases, with the intent one day of controlling that area. I've got several pictures over to the left there where you can see where they've taken these islands and they've done a lot of land, reclamation projects, kind of build up those areas, and they put, air bases there. There's missile facilities. There, harbors for ships, and just a lot of naval air and missile capability. So, is China going to launch a sneak attack, from this area, in the near future? Probably not, but they are starting to build up their presence in that area. And you have to remember, it's so controversial because all of those islands, right? They're contested, by all these other countries. The Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, even Taiwan, claim ownership of these things, and China has just taken them and started building up their military forces.
Hmm. Yeah, there's this has been all over the news. The contested islands and what they've been doing there. Of course, we've done really nothing at this point to stop any of that. I know that under the Trump administration, Taiwan, we were beginning to, actually begin to supply Taiwan with military equipment again, and that's definitely heightened the tension. But all of that came after China basically started walking away from the table and started really showing their true colors after Trump's initial, reach out to them. So it's not a pretty picture there. So you talked about you talked about Hong Kong there, Caleb, a bit, and China's relationship with Hong Kong. How what we've seen. I mean, Sharon had traveled to Hong Kong quite a bit, actually, up to about a year and a half ago or so, and she witnessed. She was there actually when some of the protests were occurring, and the demonstrations were occurring, and there's no freedom of speech there. I mean, it's pretty much. I mean, you can't speak out against the CCP. You're going to be pretty much identified and targeted and eventually arrested. So what's happening in Hong Kong? The question of whether it's a sort of a picture of what would happen if China takes over another country. Do you have examples of other countries where China has, kind of gone in and taken over, or at least exerted their influence in a way that is indicative of what might occur, with other countries like the United States, perhaps?
Yeah, we'll kind of expand the picture out of the Central
Hmm.
Asia, South China Sea area, and kind of talk through some other areas of the world where China is flexing their economic muscles. So when you expand further out, and you think about what China's doing, first of all, they have avoided expensive wars in the Middle East. While many countries, but mostly the United States, has spent trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan and other Middle Eastern countries with military and economic aid, China has not. They've enacted a free rider policy, meaning that they don't have a security policy or presence in the Middle East, but they try to extract as much value from these partnerships as possible. And you really have to understand China's motivations from an economic viewpoint, and there are really two major points. And number one is that China is the world's largest exporter of goods, and they rely on this for their newly acquired wealth and desire to place or replace the United States as a sole superpower. China has built a massive industrial manufacturing complex unlike the world has ever seen. And this has significantly eroded the United States manufacturing expertise because American companies continue to pursue short-term profits, by importing goods as cheaply as possible instead of building them themselves. President Trump was the only president that attempted to reverse this trend by imposing significant tariffs on China. Just imagine that. This kind of illustrates the scope of their infrastructure. From in the years between 2012 and 2014, China laid more concrete than the United States laid between 1900 and 2014. So just imagine the scope of the infrastructure that they're building there.
Hmm.
The second point is that China is the world's largest importer of oil, which is required to maintain their massive industrial complex. Much like Germany in World War II, energy is China's Achilles heel. Okay, they only produce about 2 million barrels of oil, per day, but they consume nearly 10 times as much. And
Hmm.
also, their geopolitical rivals like Japan and India are also huge importers of oil. So controlling this oil supply could one day be very beneficial to them. And despite the left's call for in the United States for a Green New Deal and banning fracking, the United States becoming energy independent, which they are today, provides us with just tremendous security. But we'll see how long that actually lasts. So for those two main reasons, it is becoming more and more critical for China to establish reliable and inexpensive networks to both export their cheaply made goods to build up their economy, but also to import energy. Okay, so what this leads us to is China's most aggressive campaign probably in the history of the world to influence 2/3 of the world's population, and that's the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, some people call this the modern Silk Road. Okay, and this was started back in 2013, and it is a extremely ambitious infrastructure project, involving up to 100 nations. Okay, it involves constructing world-class highways, high-speed railways, and shipping ports along major sea lines, throughout Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Europe. And throughout many of these routes, there's also huge amounts of infrastructure, special economic zones, and cities being constructed. And almost all these cases also, you have to remember that China is loaning this money to build this infrastructure to underdeveloped nations, knowing well and good that they're not going to be able to repay China. And when they default on these loans, China takes control of it. Right. And so these are really predatory loans or debt traps for these developing countries. China's launching this huge PR campaign to advertise how they're helping these countries to build up their economy and infrastructure, when in fact their only true motivation is their own self-interest. Okay, so let's on this slide here, we'll kind of talk through the maritime portion of the Belt and Road initiative. Start with Sri Lanka down on the bottom right of the screen. China, loaned this country billions of dollars to build this deep water port, knowing that they weren't going to be able to repay the loan. So what did China do? They took it over, right? And now they own it for 99 years. They got a 99-year lease on this critical port. You can think about all the traffic which goes west, like towards the Middle East and Europe, or east towards the South China Sea or Pacific, has to pass through that area there. Then you look at Oman at Duqm, right? You probably haven't heard of Duqm, but you will. Okay, that's like in the right there. We get where we get your pointer. They're investing heavily in there. Like a few years ago, there was nothing here but sand, but now there's billions of dollars that are being invested by China in this area to build this strategic port. But not only that, but an entire industrial city, right? So what this allows China to do is they can get oil out of that huge, area there of Saudi Arabia and all these other countries without even have to enter the Persian Gulf. And that, I can tell you, that's a huge advantage. You're not having to go through the Strait of Hormuz to get the oil out of the area, because that could easily be closed off, right? If you look at Djibouti, okay, down on the bottom left, right, this is China's only military base outside of Asia. And of course, keeping with their free rider policy, China isn't using this military base to be involved in counter piracy, counter terrorism, or counter narcotics activities, much like the U.S. is. They're out, for economic and military reasons only that benefit them. They've investing just a ton of money in Djibouti, building up the infrastructure there, and much like Sri Lanka, it's really a predatory loan, and if they're able to get the Dorley container terminal there, that will just be a huge win for China. Because think about that strait there, the Bab al Mandeb Strait, right? This is only about 18 miles wide, okay, right there
Wow.
at the closest point. And where the navigable water is only about 6 miles wide. So all the traffic coming from Europe, and even the United States, and South America, has to go through the Mediterranean Sea and through the Suez Canal, unless you want to go all the way around Africa. So controlling that area, is huge, and China recognizes the economic and military possibilities for that. But the probably the most beneficial acquisition for China was Gwadar, okay, up in Pakistan there, yeah, right there. So they built a new deepwater port in Pakistan in Gwadar, and unlike all and just like all these other areas, they built infrastructure, a city, $50 billion worth of projects in this area, and they've taken it over because Pakistan couldn't pay for it. So now they own it for 40 years. Okay, so what else do? They built this highway going from Gwadar straight up to Kashgar, China, okay, which is called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. And this cuts off 15 days of travel time for oil to get to China, right? Because they can just go straight from Duqm to Gwadar up to China by just going all the way around India, through the Straits of Malacca, through the South China Sea, and up to their ports on the southern tip of China. And of course, China being a master of deception, they've marketed this as improving the economic conditions for a poor Pakistani country, when really for them it's all about getting oil into their country, and also being able to use this to export goods the other way. So if you remember, there are two priorities. They've got to get oil into the country, and they got to get their goods out of the country. And this allows them to access, the Arabian Sea very easily, and get their goods to market throughout the world much easier, and also to get oil in the country. If you just think about, what they're advertising about, increasing Pakistan's economic capability, but they've got a huge trade deficit with Pakistan. What they are pushing towards them by buying from them is completely lopsided. So just if you just think just in general here, we talked about the Straits of Malacca earlier, how they're trying to control that. With Duqm and Gwadar there, they could easily control the Straits of Hormuz. With their presence in Djibouti, they could easily control the Bab al Mandeb Strait, and obviously everything coming out of the Suez Canal. That's three of the of the four major straits in the entire world, which they could easily control.
Hmm.
Now, so that's just the maritime portion of this Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, so let's talk about the land routes now. You can go to the next slide there, Steve. So they are building a massive complex of road and railway projects that go all the way from eastern China through the Middle East and Africa, and all the way to Europe. And this graphic doesn't show all the offshoots of the roads and the railways, but it does give you a scope, of this project. And again, China's advertising this project as improving economic conditions of many developing countries and promoting free trade throughout this entire region. But you remember China's motivations. They have to get, their exports out of their country, and they have to get oil into the country. And this is what this, allows them to do. So it benefits China much more than anyone else. China has no, true philanthropic, motivations like with this project. Just think about, just recently, as the United States is trying to enforce sanctions on Iran, China is buying oil from them, and they're shipping it into their country, through this rail
Hmm.
project. This is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Hmm.
All these routes are is very similar to the ancient, Silk Road that's been used for centuries, but now, these high-speed trains and the roads are replacing the camels. And it's not just about the roads and the railways. Along these routes, China, is investing, hundreds of billions of dollars on city infrastructure. China's telecom companies, Huawei and ZTE, are building the backbone for IT infrastructure that will support, the 5G network throughout these cities. We'll talk about in a few minutes here how China is using, 5G and their surveillance methods to control citizens of their own country, and how they could do this in other countries as well.
Hey Caleb, let me just interject something real quickly. I don't want to throw you off your train of thought here at all, but just one point here to make. In terms of the way this road, sort of, and I know you said that you don't have all of the tentacles, off of this main artery, but it's fascinating when I was looking at this. You've got the Fertile Crescent right here. This is Fertile Crescent, and right at the tip of that Fertile Crescent is Babylon.
Yeah.
And you think about how much you gave some great statistics about the amount of concrete they poured, you know, and how they're building all these cities. And we've had discussions in the past about how can prophetic Babylon come into existence. Hmm, just interesting. And just keep that, park that, everybody. I'll come back to that at the end. But anyway, go ahead, Caleb. Sorry to interrupt you there. I
Yeah,
wanted to point that out.
you got ahead of me, Steve. You stole some of my thunder
Oh,
there. I was going to make a
oh,
big point about that, but
oh no. Sorry about that. I didn't.
it, but
I
I
didn't see
mean,
that on our question list.
well, it was kind of rolled into the other ones, but it's a great point, and just how quickly they can, change things and build up infrastructure. So yeah, very, very, very good point. So, it, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of telecom, a lot of things being built, but also, it's also about expanding, the China influence and culture throughout these regions too. I mean, just think about the perceptions that, Iranians have towards China compared to their perceptions towards the United States. Like one of these countries is imposing sanctions. They pulled
Mhm.
out of the Iranian nuclear agreement, and they're constantly patrolling in the Persian Gulf. Right, that's the United States. But the other country, China, is building roads within their cities. They're buying their oil. They're exporting, cheaply made goods to them. I mean, you don't see Iranians burning Chinese flags or chanting "Death to China" or calling them the Great Satan. And
Right.
that's also part of Chinese, strategy, is that the whole PR campaign.
Hmm. This is great, Caleb. So we've got about. I want to allow some time for Q&A toward the end. And what we'll do, folks, is we normally go to about 5:15. What we'll do is we'll try to target finishing around 5 minutes after 5 o'clock, or top of the hour for us. I mean, we got people in different time zones, so top of the hour is about 20 minutes away. 5 minutes after, sometime between the next 20, 25 minutes, we'll target kind of wrapping this up and allowing for some Q&A. But if the Q&A, you can stay as long as you want, and as long as we have questions, we'll try to field those. If they go past 5:15 or 15 after the hour, we'll do that. But we're going to try to target wrapping this up in the next 20 to 25 minutes. So, Caleb, are you ready to move to like China's influence and relationship with the U.S. and like the
Sure, yeah,
economy? We talked about the debt earlier and their intent on replacing U.S. dollar. Are you ready to move to that?
sure, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so if you just think about the our U.S. debt to China and what they're really trying to do with a dollar, so China owns like about 1.2 trillion dollars of our debt, right? And it never seems like a good idea to be in debt to your greatest adversary. So, let let me caveat this with saying that I'm not an economist, right? And I'm not nearly as smart as Steve or Sharon in this area. So all my comments here are is based on what I've read, and it may be speculation, but I'm just giving you my opinion, throughout this.
That's fine.
Um, so so if you think, okay, well, if the United States is China's biggest adversary too, why don't they just sell the treasuries, right? And which would sink the dollar. Well, I think there's a lot of good reasons why they're not doing this, right now. But I think the biggest reasons that right now is that it would sink the dollar, and China is all about the long game, and at least for right now, they probably benefit by keeping the value of the dollar higher than the yuan, so that they can keep pumping their cheap goods into the United States at an affordable price, and we'll keep buying them.
Hmm.
But who knows, what the impact of the Belt and Road Initiative will be if they can gain sufficient, revenue from 2/3 of the globe that they're targeting, then that could be a plausible maneuver for them. Eventually, China wants to replace the dollar with cryptocurrency, right? The digital yuan, right? And unlike Bitcoin, right? The digital yuan will be highly centralized, right? China, deceptively claims that the reason for the structure being this way is, to prevent gambling or money laundering, right? But we all know what China's, motivations are. This is going to provide them, vast information about where and how people spend money. It promotes the CCP's supervision and control of the currency, and just enhances the centralization of power. Right now, like China is actually testing the digital yuan that it started developing, back in 2014. And once this testing is complete, and in China, they could easily export this to Iran or any other countries in which they have gained a tremendous amount of influence. Who knows? I mean, maybe as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, China could mandate that all Belt and Road participants start using this digital currency. Just if you think about just how they're trying to influence things. Just back in August of this year, the CCP waived forex trading fees between the yuan and 12 other countries. Just attempting to gain that buy-in. So just imagine a world monetary system of no banks. And when CCP has complete authority, and they could delete your money with a keystroke, right? It sounds like something straight out of Revelation.
Hmm. Yeah, and so, oh man, I'd love to comment on that more, but we're kind of short on time. So I guess moving on here, Caleb, we've heard a lot, I mean, even recently in the last week or two, you hear about this mass, this another mass, I guess, migration, if you will, of illegal immigrants that are headed up toward our border. And there's been a lot of things happening, just across the border with Mexico, where drug cartels have been involved. To what extent is China involved in funding the drug cartels and the drug inflow into the U.S.?
Yeah, well, there's two main reasons how China gets drugs into the United States. One is that they manufacture about 90% of the ingredients that the cartels in Mexico use, to import their drugs into the United States. But also they're producing fentanyl, okay, which is um, you know,
Hmm.
this is a synthetic opioid. It causes tens of thousands of deaths in the United States. There's like 140 companies in China that are manufacturing this. It's very poorly regulated. It's cheap to make. It's easy to move. It's very powerful in daily and small doses. It's probably the strongest opioid based painkiller in the world. It's about 100 times stronger than morphine and about 50 times stronger than heroin.
Hmm.
So they're smuggling this in directly from China to the United States on these massive cargo ships. And there's even a method where you can buy it directly online and have it shipped to your house if you're really that bold. So what they're
Wow.
doing is that they're really using this to undermine, foreign countries whose power threatens the CCP. If you just, and it's actually outlined in, the book they wrote back in 1999. They wrote this book called Unrestricted Warfare, and that's one of the methods that they talk about. This unconventional, asymmetrical tactics, such as drug warfare to, you know, to to bring harm to their adversaries. It's just another prong in their multifaceted long game campaign for China for world dominance.
Hmm. Yeah, so just in the interest of time, Caleb, I'm going to kind of push us forward here a little bit. I mean, if you have some more to say about the drug trade or the drug inflow, that's fine. But um, talking about academia, there's been a lot of talk about, and some talk about how China has basically funneled tons of money into our academic institutions, and really, influencing the indoctrination of our younger generations. And I know I've gone over the book. We looked at the book Howard Zinn, or Debunking Howard Zinn. I think I mentioned that in the past and maybe shared some things there. But China is equally involved in indoctrination through some of their efforts. Can you talk to some of those efforts a bit?
Yeah. So right now there are 80 Confucius Institutes in the United States at major universities, and just like the Belt and Road Initiative, China promotes their Confucius Institutes as a peaceful initiative to promote, Chinese culture and language in foreign countries. They offer courses in Mandarin and Chinese culture, and also host Chinese operas at a, significantly reduced cost in the normal college courses, and they're also open to the public. Where, in reality, their primary motivation is espionage and to influence or indoctrinate, foreign students. The instructors at these institutes are hired by China, not the universities. The CCP completely controls the narratives of the Confucius Institutes, and it's not just the United States that China's targeting. They're present in 120 culture or countries, and of course, I don't think there's a problem with sharing cultures of different societies, but we shouldn't do it on a grand scale with countries that don't promote freedom, democratic principles, human rights, civil liberties, or rule of law.
Hmm. It, so are well, I guess moving on from that, just in the interest of time too, are they stealing intellectual property or, military secrets from the U.S.? How are they involved in that?
Yeah, if you go to that last slide, I'll kind of talk through this.
Oh, yeah, sure. We got one more.
So the short answer is yes, right? And this is how it works, right? So the United States or other countries spend billions or possibly trillions of dollars on research and development to bring products to market or to support you know defense, and then China either steals the technology or obtains the product themselves and reverse engineers how to produce it at a much lower cost. So not only do they save the substantial research and development costs, but their labor cost is much lower than any other developed country that have labor regulations or support any level of human rights. If you just look at what they've done over the years with, Boeing and some of our other like defense manufacturers. I put a few slides on here, and this is just a small example of what they've done. But you look at our, the Air Force's, F-22 Raptor. Well, the J-20 looks a whole lot like the F-22, right? The J-31 is almost an exact replica of the F-35. Their Y-20 is almost an exact replica of the F-35, and this is just a small example from the Air Force, but they're attempting to do this, in all aspects of the military, missile technology, naval forces, all over the place, and it's not just the military, it's in the commercial sector as well. So they are heavily involved in that.
Yeah. So I guess, and I think we could probably talk about a number of other, well, just we could elaborate on a lot of what we've already talked about to a much greater extent. But kind of moving toward our interest and our primary interest, Caleb, how do you see China playing a role? We've dealt with setting the stage quite a bit in a lot of different series that I've taught, and we've had discussions about that as a group. But how does China play a role in setting the stage for eschatological or prophesied events in Scripture? How do you see that?
Yeah, so we'll talk about that for a while here. So, I think one of the biggest takeaways is just how quickly things could change leading up to the last days. And you kind of stole my thunder here, because I was going to kind of give you that, Babylon uh,
Hmm.
example that you talked about here. But just think of how quickly China has built roads and ports and railways and complete cities, and other infrastructure throughout the Middle East and other areas. Think about how quickly China has built their own infrastructure. Technology is improving at an astonishing rate. So, let's just summarize some of the things that we've talked about and how this may fit into, the world heading towards the events of Daniel's 70th week. We talked a little bit about, the digital currency, and how easily, a state, could control who has or doesn't have money to spend. A person's bank account could be frozen or erased with a few clicks of a mouse. And, regardless of whether or not the digital yuan replaces the dollar, it's likely that some form of digital currency will be adopted in in the near future. And this sounds something, straight out of Revelation, in the mark of the beast that, could permit or deny, someone for buying goods or conducting trades. Um, Social credit system, okay, number two, okay. So this is what, China has adopted this in many of the regions of China, and with the goal of it being, nationwide. And this is, it's not like a FICO credit score, which is based on tangible credit worthiness. This is based on, your finances, your social media activity, your health records, your behavior in public, online purchases, and internet searches, legal matters, people that you associate with, or in
Hmm.
many other criteria. China has installed 200 million, yes, 200 million cameras that have facial recognition software, that are currently in operation. That's one camera per every 7 citizens, right? And they're installing, the telecom IT backbone, with these surveillance cameras and a 5G network. We'll talk about 5G here in a minute. But these, getting back to more of the social credit system, the way this works is that, like, everyone starts out with like 1,000 points, right? And then, you go up or down, based on, how well you align with the CCP's objectives. You can be anywhere from a AAA rating to a D, right? And there's about 5 different levels that you can fall in. And, based on where you fall in that, determines whether or not your kids are going to get into the right, schools, or you can get a loan, or what interest rate you're going to have, or whether you can travel. The cost of your utilities or rent, it's all based on that, right? If you get a AAA rating, hey, you're probably going to be a health priority. If you have some medical issues, if you're just an A, well, maybe you get school priority. But if you're a D, man, you're on like a national blacklist, right? And you're locked into this for 5 years, right? And it's publicly disclosed to all the employers throughout the country, so they know, hey, don't hire this guy that's got this low social credit score, right? So, you can gain points by donating money, although no one knows where the money is going. It's probably to the CCP. You know, if you report illegal conduct, you know, if you obtain information on people for the CCP, if you catch a criminal, or at least, you know, people that the CCP identifies as criminals, you know, donate organs, you know, you can get, you know, some extra points. You know, if your kid joins the army, right? But, you know, you can lose points by, you know, if you publish any negative criticism of the CCP on the Chinese social media, you know, even like speeding or parking tickets, you know, illegally holding church services, right, or classes, you know, particularly those not sanctioned by the CCP. You know, even things as small as, you know, unauthorized renovation of your house, if your tombstone is too big, right? And you know, and China will, you know, if you get like these dings on your credit score, they, you know, they force you to post them. Like, it's called a self-criticism, right? And depending on how high that goes, you know, determines how many extra points you lose. The next topic is 5G and quantum computers. Okay, so you've probably heard all the commercials about 5G, and you think, okay, great, you know, what is this? You know, just a marketing campaign to get me to buy a new phone, or maybe, you know, and maybe that's just a little bit better than 4G or 3G. No, 5G is a game changer, okay? And it's not just to get you to the coffee shop faster, right? This thing, it's 100 times faster than 4G, all right? It expands the bandwidth of IT systems on a logarithmic scale, right? And it can be used to collect and process a tremendous amount of data and information, right? 5G is all about automating machine-to-machine communications and control of data, okay? Now, on the quantum computer side, right? Think about how exponentially computer technology has advanced over the past few decades, right? But the basics of computing is still the same as it was when computers were first invented, right? You know, we still rely on a combination of ones and zeros, just like the first IBM computer did. Quantum computers are going to change that, okay? Instead of ones and zeros, they use the spin of an electron or polarization of a photon, right? I could talk about quantum mechanics for days, but unless you're going to build these things, you know, you really don't even know that. You just know that quantum computers will be 100 million times faster than current computers, right? 100 million times faster, right? So, uh, you know, next point. China is quickly gaining influence and respect from Muslim nations in the Middle East, right? And this seems kind of odd, given that China has imprisoned a large part of their Muslim Uyghur population, you know, placed them in re-education camps or enforced factory labor jobs. But, you know, the Middle East leaders seem to overlook these atrocities because China is pumping billions of dollars into their countries. You know, throughout, you know, their efforts in the Middle East, and the fact that, you know, many European, Asia, and African countries are buying into the Belt and Road Initiative, you know, just more evidence that the world continues to drive, you know, more towards this globalism, relativism, and Marxism system. So, you know, can we say that China is going to be integral to the events described in Daniel's study of the week? You know, I mean, didn't we just say a couple of years ago that we thought the Islamic State was going to be kind of leading this effort? Well, no one knows, you know, what's really gonna happen. You know, but it's very possible that China could be involved. I mean, just think about, I mean, all the things that they're doing, you know, connecting all these remote areas with trade, telecom, infrastructure, and IT backbone, right? Implementing surveillance cameras with facial recognitions in all these areas throughout the world that they're adding to this infrastructure. You know, the social credit scores, promoting the digital worldwide currency, right? All four of those alone, you know, will allow a government to have tremendous control over their people, you know, allowing or preventing them from buying goods and necessities, you know, unless their social credit score is high enough, right? Or some other, you know, form of the mark of the beast as described in Revelation. You know, just think about, you know, the influence they're spreading, they're suppressing the Christian beliefs, you know, the damage they're adding with the proliferation of fentanyl and other drugs. You know, I've read some reports about China is involved in gene editing, right, of their soldiers to maybe change the nature of human beings, you know, possibly making them better equipped to, you know, handle extreme weather, chemical attacks, or just be stronger. So, it's possible China could implement like all this infrastructure, technology, and culture, leading, towards this, borderless socialist worldwide system, and then collapse, right, due to being economically overextended, which would, could lead towards another entity, possibly a Muslim, country or someone else, like using all this technology and infrastructure in the last state. So, but it's really not about who is doing it. It's a matter of that it's happening, right? And
Hmm.
once all this is in place, right, you can't like not, use it. Someone's going to use it, right?
Right.
So that's that's the point.
Yeah, that's Caleb, that's fantastic. This is really, really good. I want to say a few things just in the way of, unless you have some more to add, I wanted to add a few things to what you've just said and then open it up for questions. Okay, and these will be questions directed first to you, and then I'll try to field whatever is necessary. But for those of you who maybe didn't catch this morning on Sunday Morning Futures today, Maria Bartiromo interviewed Peter Schweitzer. Peter Schweitzer wrote a book called Clinton Cash. I think he's written some other books of late. That he's really done a fantastic job with some of the work that he's done. And as he was being interviewed, he brought out some things that I thought were very interesting because you've heard Eric Swalwell in the news and his compromised state with cavorting with a Chinese spy, and but that's just really a younger guy. Think about this: Mitch McConnell. Peter Schweitzer brought out or pointed out Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, his wife Elaine Chao, her family owns a shipping business. The purchases of the ships themselves are financed by the Chinese government. The ships are built and the crews are trained by the CCP, the Chinese government. The contracts that they get are they're contracts for shipping goods from state-owned enterprises around the Pacific. I wonder if that might influence any of Mitch McConnell's decisions. Nancy Pelosi, her husband Paul Pelosi, he's done a series of deals in China directly related to the Chinese government. Dianne Feinstein, her husband Richard Blum, he's been doing deals for 25 years with the Chinese government and benefited from private meetings that Feinstein and had with high-level Chinese officials. And China's followed this same strategy of basically neutering or what I think Schweitzer used was the term decapitating high-level officials through compromise, in different governments, including Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and as Caleb mentioned, in other places. So this stuff is, our government's been compromised. It's not what we think it's been. So let me close this out with just touching on a few points from a biblical perspective, a biblical eschatological perspective, and how China, Caleb did a great job of parlaying all of that information into, kind of the eschatological perspective. I want to just highlight a few additional things to kind of build on what he said. The period of Daniel's 70th week, as we know, is a 7-year period. It's going to include incredible evil and to also include God's judgment through the different judgments that are described in the book of Revelation. There's going to be a rise and to a position of great prominence of a political, economic, and religious prophetic Babylon, as Caleb mentioned, and we both talked about there. And I believe, as does Charlie Dyer and many others, that prophetic Babylon that's described in Revelation chapter 17 and 18 is in fact going to be in that same geographical area as ancient Babylon, right at the tip of the Fertile Crescent. The harlot who rides the beast that's described, is in fact that prophetic Babylon. And the beast is going to use that prophetic Babylon, that harlot, for a while, and then actually destroy prophetic Babylon so that he can consolidate to himself, really the oligarchy that is the beast can consolidate to itself all the powers that are held by this political, religious, economic entity. This emergence of this oligarchy of rulers is going to be, in fact, an oligarchy, and that is described as the beast. And then what happens is one of them rises to power from amongst that oligarchy, the little horn of Daniel, to aggregate all those powers to himself and cause the others to submit to his power. That's the man known as the Antichrist. Both prophetic Babylon and the beast will be a source of persecution and martyrdom for believers in Jesus. Economic and other control is going to be enforced through a mark, as Caleb mentioned. And he hit on the exact point, how China is definitely moving in that direction. Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 through 17. The conditioning that we see, the things that are happening today is really conditioning that's happening on a global scale. And examples of that conditioning is the mass acceptance of mask wearing in response to a CCP generated virus, indoctrination through Marxist laden centralized control ideologies, the indoctrination that the U.S. is inherently evil and oppressive, a colonialist power, you hear terms such as Christian nationalism. I won't have time to talk about all these terms, but Christian nationalism, white privilege, systemic racism, critical theory and critical race theory, individualism is bad, collectivism is good, capitalism is bad, socialism and redistributionism is good. How are we going to prove that we've been vaccinated when the vaccinations occur? The virus today is mutating in Europe into more virulent strains. I just heard this the other day. There's a global cabal, with money led by figures such as George Soros, who views the U.S. and the concept of nationalism, as wrong, as evil, and they saw the nonconformist Trump as a impediment to the Great Reset that they had targeted for 2021. Well, guess what? They did everything they possibly could to bring about the conditions to affect that Great Reset, to include, involvement in the U.S. elections and actually fraud and manipulation of the results, so that we now have a metaphor of the spiritual condition of the United States potentially moving into the presidency and vice presidency here in a few days. I mean, I view Harris and Biden as nothing but a metaphor of the spiritual condition of the United States. You've got one that's basically suffering from dementia, and you got the other one who's a vacuum tube. And those two have they're just figureheads, and empty figureheads, really, when it comes to any kind of ideology of their own. And that's a metaphor for the vacuous nature of the spiritual condition of the United States, of the people of the United States. The motive, well, the motive of China, I believe, is a pseudo. I mean, most of these people they're motivated by bringing about a pseudo nirvana in their mind, and that's the way they're seeing it. It's really nothing more than Satan's counterfeit, of a kingdom of heaven that they're trying to create, which is actually a hell on earth. Now, as Caleb mentioned, China is not specifically mentioned in Scripture, but the aspirations and foundational efforts of China's CCP and its pursuit of its goals will be leveraged by the prophesied harlot that is prophetic Babylon and the beast who is to come. So Caleb, fantastic job, a fantastic job. I think this was fantastic. And so let me open it up to questions. And if anybody has any questions, please just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. And Caleb, if you will, do your best to address the question first, and then I'll add to it if necessary. Questions from anybody?
Hey, Caleb, Steve, it's Greg. Hey, Caleb, you talked about the 5G network quite a bit, and I'm sure you already know this, but here in the United States, we've tried to squash the development of the 5G because it interferes with satellite communications, satellite in the form of GPS, especially related to aviation, during weather conditions and using the satellite, because all this VORs and ILS approaches are getting really old, and they're very expensive to keep up. So they what they've done in the United States is they're going more and more to the satellite-based operation for navigation. So apparently the 5G network is very detrimental to the navigation of satellite-based navigating. So I didn't know if you knew that, and I just kind of wanted to see what you thought maybe of how that might be related to some of the things you talked about. If we don't come up with it and we don't have that type of speed for communications, wow, um, how would that really affect us? Uh, if you could maybe touch on that, or maybe just save it and bench it for later.
Uh, well, Greg, I think it's a good point you bring up, and I agree with everything that you said. But I think that I'll give you another answer that may be more applicable, and it really involves the fragility of our GPS technology, right? And how easily China could take that out. I mean, they've already conducted multiple ASAT, which stands for anti-satellite tests, where they can knock out our GPS capability completely. And they've developed their own, like, it's a similar technology to GPS with their own satellites that they could use for positioning throughout the world. But but you're right. I mean, just think about how much we rely on GPS today, and how fragile that system is, and how much of an advantage China could have if we didn't have the ability to use GPS, but they had the ability to use it under their own technology.
Hmm. Yeah, good. That's good. Okay. Anybody else? Other questions? Anybody have questions on maybe how this fits into the setting of the stage? Or even comments that we can respond to? Wow, we must have done the subject so much justice that there's no questions. I'm not sure.
I'll ask one.
Sure.
So this was super interesting. I tried to ask him a few questions and he wouldn't answer. So he said I needed to tune in. And I have lots of questions, but in our house, we try not to buy things that are made in China. Now, if something is made in the US and they've imported goods from China, I don't have any control over that. But knowing what we know, what can we do other than avoid buying goods from China? What can just the average person do? What do you suggest?
Caleb, I'm gonna let you answer that one first. That's a great question.
Well, first thing is vote. I mean, just think about what President Trump has done with the tariffs against China, and all of his efforts to, control the influx of, immigration, and which really means spies from China, because they have pretty much designated all their citizens as spies. So that's the biggest thing we can do, and also just recognize, like, what China is doing. The other big thing is, don't let China build your 5G network, right? Because they will, put in, the backbone, for that, to have direct communications, back to the CCP, which is exactly what they're doing. If you think about, Huawei and ZTE are the biggest telecom companies in the entire world, right? And they want to build these 5G networks everywhere, and whatever is also the follow on. So I think more than anything, it's just, is not have blinders on, and just realize just what, China and the CCP are trying to do around the world.
Hmm. Yeah, I think voting is definitely critical. I obviously, I think to your point, Hillary, it's trying to avoid buying anything manufactured in China. My goodness, it's very difficult to do. I mean, if you start examining carefully your potential purchases, you find China. I found made in China on the back of on the back of some Christmas cards that I had sent to me by a Christian organization. I thought, my gosh, and so that's another thing. But the other thing I think we're going to have to do is we're going to have to become much more vocal with our politicians about what needs to be done. in response to this, and not only in response to this, but a lot of other things going on in our country too. But I think we're going to have to become much more involved and less passive, sort of sitting back and thinking, okay, I'll just wait to vote. I mean, voting is important and that's the right thing to do, but my goodness, we've just witnessed the whole manipulation of our whole voting system. And so we're going to have to become much more vocal and obviously holding our elected officials accountable, starting at the local level, because that's where Soros is injecting a lot of money, is at the very local levels. So that's an excellent question. What can we do? I think that's really what this boils down to. Ultimately, if human history goes the direction is, it starts going the direction at a faster pace than what we think otherwise it may go, we could find ourselves, quite frankly, in a situation where we're really seeing the setting of the stage occur, at a pace that we would have never imagined. I mean, the things that have happened in 2020, I would have never imagined happening at such a pace, and would have never imagined them happening like they have, a year ago. So who knows what 2021 holds for us? I have no idea. But I guess to that point, if they do start happening in that direction, we're alert to what's going on. I think God uses this and uses this type of thing, and He's used it throughout history to basically refine His own. And so we can look at it as a refining opportunity for ourselves. So great question. Anybody else? If you need
I
to
have
leave,
two quick
feel free to go, but go
Sorry.
ahead, Sharon. Sorry.
Two quick questions. One, did you find any research on the natural resources that China has acquired, particularly in Africa, maybe South America? And my second question is, was there any revelation regarding Israel's relationship with China in your research?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first question about the natural resources. So, like, this is remarkable if you think about this. Like, if we go to war with China, we are in a world of hurt, because most of the components that we get for our military technology comes from China, right? So if you look at, and what it is like, it's a lot of these, rare earth metals and stuff that are imported to China that we need for, night vision or some communications, or think about all the telecom equipment that we have that we buy from China. So, it's an excellent question. That, what do we do? I mean, you think they're going to keep selling us these products if we go to war with them? I mean, it's pretty amazing how we have outsourced our manufacturing, to our greatest adversary. And your question about Israel. Well, if you note, like, on the Belt and Road, you have an initiative and kind of all the tentacles which come out for that. It doesn't go through Israel, right? It doesn't go through Afghanistan, because there's nothing for them there, right? It has no natural resources, right? It doesn't go through any place where they cannot benefit from it.
Great questions, Sharon. Those are great. Anybody else?
Hey, Caleb, it's Brett. It was a great presentation, by the way. Just wanted to make a comment on what you just said about the manufacturing. I had just read an article the other day about I think they were calling for the U.S. to stop buying the drones from China, because the drones that we're using apparently for the U.S. mapping systems and for pipelines, and they're also using it in other government agencies. They're also using it for law enforcement agencies. And this reporter was saying that it's basically like a two-way system, that actually China is directly spying. Of course, I think it's something we already all know, that they're spying on all of our systems and infrastructure, but they were calling for manufacturing companies here for somebody to manufacture the drones and all the products and the parts and everything here in the United States. And again, I mean, we all know this, but it's just like nothing's changing or being done about it. But it was just a great presentation. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, I mean, example after example after example how Chinese, companies and the military have tunneled into our systems to, um, you know, survey their competition or steal secrets from them. And I think you're right.
Yeah, Caleb, real quickly, just a thought in that regard. I thought about the cyber attacks that recently occurred, against our government institutions, the Treasury, for instance. Uh, did you run across, that's pretty recent, that's really recent, but did you run across anything indicating and tying China to that? I'm sure they are, but Russia was identified and Iran, I think, and perhaps China too. Did you run across anything in that regard?
No, that was pretty recent, Steve. I haven't looked at that too much in depth yet, but
Okay.
I would not be surprised if it's there.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I wouldn't either. Okay. Anybody else? We probably need to wrap this up, but feel free to ask any other questions you might have.
One more.
Yeah.
So you touched on the military just a little bit. Seems like their long range goals are the biggest threat to us, but can you touch just a little bit on their military strength? Are they, I mean, we've all seen the videos of them, parading their weapons through the streets, but how strong is their military?
Yeah, so I had to be a little careful on that one, just because of my experience in the military. I have trouble answering that directly. But here's what I'll tell you is like they they're not super focused right now on flexing their military muscles, and um, they are conducting a lot of asymmetrical warfare. So for example, instead of investing hundreds of billions of dollars on a fleet of aircraft carriers, they'll just invest $1 billion on developing an anti-aircraft ballistic missile system, right? They'll invest money on investing in anti-satellite technology. So they they're very frugal. They're very asymmetrical. They recognize that it could possibly bankrupt them to try to compete strictly with the United States, toe to toe from a military aspect, and so they approach it from a different means, or much more of an asymmetrical side than a pure military strength. So I can't really get into more depth on just capabilities, just because a lot of that's information that I knew back when I was involved with the military.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think just to add to that, and I don't have that potential issue to it, from what I've seen, Hillary, China and Russia have begun to engage a lot more in joint military exercises, which is very interesting. China is, as Caleb mentioned, and this is public information about them involving themselves in CRISPR technology to develop the super soldier concept. So they're definitely interested in that. They're interested in military from the standpoint of how it gives them leverage in these other areas of warfare. So I think that's from their perspective, like Caleb said, I don't think they want to focus on a direct head-to-head conflict with the United States right now. They're waiting for the right time to take us down. And because right now we're serving we're playing right into their needs. We're a huge funnel of money into China because we're buying so many Chinese goods. So, why call our debt? Why involve, why basically take us down that way yet? But it's coming. And I could talk a little bit more about the whole dollar and the currency thing that Caleb mentioned, but we'll kind of leave it at that. I've mentioned that in the past, but the whole idea of fiat currency and how that places us and how much debt we've incurred and where that puts us relative to what they could do and how they could replace the U.S. dollar as the world's currency. So, but I think their military focus is really a totally different focus than the kinetic type, warfare that we've been accustomed to in the past. But it's another great question. Anybody else?
I have a question. This is Carolyn Plummer.
Carolyn?
In relation to the the virus, do you believe, or is there any evidence that would suggest that this would be a preliminary experimental assault just to see the vulnerabilities and how people handle it and what power can be gained from it?
Hmm. Yeah, I've got my thoughts, but Caleb, what do you think?
I, whether or not it was intentional, I think it's still to be determined. Personally, I would not doubt if it was intentional that they actually released this virus out of a lab instead of, through some meat market. So I think your suspicions are spot on. I just don't think that there's evidence where we can definitely say that yet.
Oh, Carolyn, here's my thoughts on that. I agree with Caleb in regards to the, knowing we don't know definitively because we've not been able to get in there and do anything, and we won't now because they've erased every evidence that we could possibly discover. But, everything leads you to, that you might know about China lead you to the conclusion that it was intentional. That being said, what were they? Why did they time it the way they did? Okay, think back to if you think back to about a little over a year ago, there were a lot of things happening in the way of the World Economic Forum. There was an Event 201 meeting that occurred. They were all talking about, virus and pandemics and all that stuff during this period of time. Um, this was all, in my opinion, this was part of China's response to Trump and his efforts to basically clamp down on China because he was kind of stepping away from talks with them because of what they were doing and how they were not adhering to agreements and how they were effectively lying. So he was basically calling them on the carpet and saying, no, you're not going to get by with this anymore. And it was clamping down on them. They were beginning to hurt. And when they began to hurt, they were like, okay, we're not going to hurt alone in this. We're going to basically cause the rest of the world to suffer. We're going to take down this president. So I think it was part of a strategy to take down the president that played right into the hands of others who, as I mentioned previously, who have similar designs on the United States that align with their desires to create this new globalist type, environment. And so I don't view it as in isolation from some of the things that Trump had been doing. I think that this was in response to some of the things that Trump. Now, can I prove it? You'll never be able to prove that. You'll never be able to collect enough evidence to unless you find some particular piece of communication from the head of the Chinese government and the CCP party saying that those very words, and we're not going to find that. But that that's the opinion that I've landed. That's where I've landed in terms of an opinion on that.
Well, the timing would kind of give you the confirmation. It's
Hmm.
this sort of thing could not be coincidental with the timing. I
Hmm.
mean, that's just almost absurd to even consider.
Hmm.
Oh, this is just an accident
Hmm.
because of the timing of everything, the presidential election, and that China was hurting from the clampdowns of Donald Trump,
Hmm.
and which I totally support his approach to that. And anyway, you've confirmed my thoughts.
Okay, well,
Thank
good.
you.
Well, we're of similar opinion for sure. And then there's probably about 74 million other people who are of the same opinion, I imagine.
Well,
Anybody?
I have another question that may be a little off topic. Um, and maybe not. What can, other than what you've already said about contacting our local elected officials,
Hmm.
what can we, the grassroots people, do to protect ourselves? And if you've not come to that place yet, or if you later plan to have any kind of forum like this to kind of help us be wise about how we prepare ourselves from an experiential day to day. You know, as believers, we know what we need to do spiritually, but from the standpoint of practical application to our lives here, um, if you all come up with something that we can do, ABC 1, 2, 3 recommendations, that would be appreciated. At least it would from my
Hmm.
household standpoint.
Yeah.
Have you considered that?
Well, oh, does somebody else have or Caleb, did you have
I
something
was
you
just
wanted?
jumping just real quick, but one thing that I would say is that I'm not a social media guy. I don't have a Facebook account or Twitter or anything else. But I would say that if you do, be very careful about what you post on social
Mm,
media, because someone is watching, okay, and they can use that information against you. All right, and with especially now with just all the machine to machine type of communications, and the speed of which this takes place and the data that's being collected worldwide, I would be very wary of any personal information that I posted on social media.
that's a very good point. And Carolyn, back to your point or to your question, yeah, if I run across specific things that we as Christians can do, like specific groups that we can maybe align ourselves with, then I'd be happy to communicate that. I think there are those who are voices that are true patriots in our country today, who are even Christians in our government. And I'm thinking of people like Ted Cruz. I'm thinking of there's others, that are true uncompromised men and women of true character and faith. We need to support them, and I would say reach out to them, tell them you're praying for them, tell them that you have that they have your support. Everybody that that you can influence to do the same, I would encourage you to do that. Those are the things that I think we can do at a grassroots level. The other thing we can do that is I mean, it has more power than anything on this earth is pray. I mean, we sometimes we don't even we underestimate the power of prayer, but God can change the direction of human history. He can delay His judgment. He can delay the withdrawal of Himself and giving people up, as Romans 1 describes it. He can delay the giving up of a people for a period of time, and those are the things I think we can do right now. But if I discover any other things that we can do, any other groups that we could align with that are of similar mind, then certainly I'm happy to share that, and vice versa.
Don't attend lectures at the Confucius Institute at your local university.
Well, thank you so much for this time. It has been very informative, and
Good.
I think that knowledge is power. So
Yes.
thank you so much for your time, guys. We appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. More than welcome. Um, we've been going for about over an hour and a half now, and I think it's about time for a bio break for most folks. Does anybody have anything else that they want to add before I close out? Okay.
Just
Well,
a
let me.
thank you to both of you, Steve,
Oh,
Caleb. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Daryl. Um, okay, well, let me close out in prayer. Thank you, Caleb. Great job. This is fantastic. Excellent, excellent job. I can't even say thank you enough. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this information. Thank you for the hope that we have as Christians. I would hate to be an unbeliever and know all this information. But let us use this to be a motivation to share truth about who Jesus is first and foremost with others who are unbelievers. We thank you for this time of year in which we're about to celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and we pray all of this in His name. Amen. Thanks, everybody.